Welcome back. You're watching Business Morning on Channels Television. I'm being joined now on the program by a former Minister of Finance and National Planning, Dr. Kalu Idika Kalu, as we continue to do a post-inauguration analysis of President Muhammadu Buhari's first year in office. Dr. Kalu, thank you so much for joining me on the program.
My pleasure, Harry. It's nice to be with you.
So there's been a lot of assessment of the last 365 days of President Muhammadu Buhari. Do you see the last 365 days as an indicator or an indication of what we're going to be seeing in the next 3 years?
Well, naturally, I suppose we can't do but extrapolate from what we have seen in the first year to get a fairly good idea of what might be coming up in the following 3 years before the end of the term. But as you mentioned the assessment, I think most of the assessments also acknowledge the fact that for all kinds of reasons, one can see why things have been unusually slow, different, difficult, challenging. And therefore, while you want to extrapolate, I think we have every right to hope that things will move a lot faster. There will be things will be a lot more coherent, and that the economy can move in the proper direction. So that it should not necessarily be a function of what has happened in this first year, which is self-dependent on what the government inherited when they came on board.
But then, looking at this economic transformation that we're hoping for in the next 3 years coming, and talking about the policies that we have, why does it still seem, or do you still think that there's no proper harmonization between monetary and fiscal policies?
Well, in fact, from my standpoint, that's even cutting it too fine. I think we've gone into a lot of avoidable imposed handicaps, and we could have avoided a lot of this. And I think this is what some who have access can emphasize to those who are in charge of basic policy. You look at the foreign exchange market. I mean, that's what everybody talks about, because you see, unlike what people think, whether you buy foreign exchange or not, ultimately, because of the interrelationships between the price system, everybody gets affected by what's happening with the foreign exchange market. Now, for a country that suffered a massive loss of terms of trade, in which we lost perhaps 70% of the unit value of our major export, we didn't have to go through the pains that we went through, but we've struggled with this over the years. You see, that's why systems are set up to assist you to get over that hump. Money is fungible. The funds that you could have devoted in other areas, then you channel them in the other areas where you cannot get that kind of funding. So we could have moved a lot faster in stabilizing the foreign exchange market. And we could have done that without having to have the naira depreciate to what we now find. So that is a basic thing. Now, I mentioned this up front because unless we've learned that lesson, unless we get over this fixation and the hangover, then we are going to be struggling with that handicap for the next year or two or more. And that is totally unnecessary.
But then the reasons why, some of the reasons why the monetary policy authorities say they take the decisions they take is because the fiscal policies are not working in tandem with expectations.
Well, you heard me say this. At our level of development, all this sophistry about bifurcation of monetary and fiscal is totally unnecessary. We are supposed to be working together. The Minister of Finance, the central bank, the executive should be working in tandem to make sure that the major indicators, particularly where you're talking about setting basic rates, where you're talking about resource mobilization, which is really the primary thing, those shouldn't be things we should be arguing about. So it's not just a function of synchronizing monetary and fiscal policy, but to make sure that this absolute optimal resource mobilization, taking advantage of facilities that will compensate for the sharp drop in export earnings, and then taking account of all the other little things you have to do with fiscal policy. We've talked about VAT and all the other sources of non-oil revenues. All this should be taken out, but we've been rather timid about it, and I think we've suffered heavily because of that. My impression is that where the Naira stands now is way, way below where it ought to be. And that is because of our self-imposed constraints on mobilizing available resources. So it is below that we start talking about the differences in harmonizing fiscal and monetary policy. So we better face up to it, or we'll find that it's going to take a lot longer to recover.
Dr. Kalu, do you think we've taken all the tough choices? Do you think Nigeria has made all the tough choices with regards to whether forex, with regards to oil and gas industry, with regards to key sectors of the economy?
Well, it's not a matter of tough. It's a matter of taking the correct. See, there will be a blend of difficulties, irrespective of what choices you take at this point. But at least you should make sure that your choices are optimal in your circumstances. And I think I don't see a reason. You see, we can expand some intent, but what counts is whether those intents are met by the policies that you implement. It's no use to say you're trying to protect the lower classes, or you're trying to protect the Naira, or you're trying to reduce inflation. What counts is what effects the policies that you implement have. No matter how piously stated the intents are, those policies have to give you the results. And it's after you've taken those range of choices that are based on optimal considerations of the context that you can now begin to talk about taking tough choices or not. You know, for a while we talked about, the government has taken very bold steps in trying to assess the leakages, the introduction of the TSA, for instance. We are still struggling with the zero-sum budgeting, where we really can say, well, before you make any additional expenditure, I think the Minister of Planning did talk about this recently, you assess why you need to make it, quite distinct from what happened in history. So those are things that are the good choices and the tough choices. But I think you can ease all of that by making sure that all the resources that are available, we're talking about a lot of IDPs, for instance, and it's happening in the South now with all the displacements that are happening. At the minimum, you go out there and get the resources that can assist you, so you don't have to spend your hard and foreign exchange for IDPs and other internally displaced refugees and so on and so forth. Ditto for so many areas in the social sector. Now, when you mobilize optimally, you're already addressing the issue of how do you reduce the cost of doing business for the small and the medium and the large-scale operators? How do you mobilize to make sure that the foreign exchange requirements of the productive sector will be met in a timely fashion at an affordable rate of exchange and so on and so forth? So all of these things are interrelated.
But then, you're talking about ease of doing business. On Sunday, Channels Television held a special May 29 reviewing some of those issues, and the Minister of Finance said that there's clarity with regards policies for investors who want to come into Nigeria to do business. But then, some investors have actually said it is less clear about how Nigeria intends to achieve, for instance, diversification.
Well, I don't want us to quibble about the use of the phrase clarity and so on. But as I said, it's not your intent that counts. It's the result of your policy. Whatever we may say, whatever claims we may make, whatever clarity we may have in our minds, as long as we are classified among the lowest, even within the African region, in terms of the ease of doing business. Of course, you can tick off about 10 different indicators. Stable foreign exchange regime is number one. Now, you can't talk about clarity when there's no clarity on foreign exchange policy. There's a lot of discretionary talk over this last year, which has to change, you see. The consumer knows best, even though you can have indicative guidance through the use of taxes and tariffs and so on and so forth. But when you start talking about we shouldn't be doing this, we shouldn't be doing this, we should be producing this, all that sounds very fine. But ultimately, it's the policy mix that enables the individual operator to make up their mind optimally in the way they allocate resources between various users. That is what really counts. The issue of sanctions, the issue of the rule of law, the issue of security, the issue of infrastructure and the cost of infrastructure, the general environment, political environment, social environment. We're talking about the security situation around the country. All of this impinge on the perception of both the domestic as well as the foreign investor. So those are the things we have to pay attention to, not so much dwell on some sort of theoretical clarity of our thoughts as to what our intents are. We have to basically focus on what the ultimate impact of our policies, what the ultimate impact is on the ease of doing business.
Do you think there's been a persistent focus on building domestic economy rather than national development and state building efforts?
Say that again?
Do you think there's been a persistent, focus on domestic economy alone and not so much on the coordination of national development and building the state as a whole?
Well, I would think there shouldn't be such a disparity in terms of the purpose that you're stating. As we've discussed in the past, we were recently classified as one of the largest economies, that in another 35 years, barring any cataclysms, we should be moving to perhaps even below the 10th position. So we have to make sure that there's complete coordination between what we can talk about developing the real sectors, talk about building the national economy, and all the other aspects that, of course, affect the national economy beyond agriculture, industry, and so on and so forth. I mean, we're talking about tourism and transportation and so on and so forth, and our perception in so many other fields outside of those basic real sectors. So there shouldn't be, the policies have to be taken in tandem, so there shouldn't be any discrepancy.
Dr. Kalu, we'll continue this conversation in just a moment. Okay. When we come back, we'll talk about what Nigerians are hoping for and what we should be expecting next. Business Morning continues in just a moment. Dr. Kalu Idika Kalu will still be here with me when I return. Stay with us.